Most of us refer to the Indian National Congress with its current media coverage. Media headlines emblazoned with recent voting results and scandals fill up hours of time slots on TV channels throughout India. But what if I told you that India's second most popular party has a history that can date back to over a century ago? A history that is marred with controversy and the beginning of a coherent and non-violent movement that managed to encompass the entirety of the subcontinent, later championing the way to the country's freedom and partition. This segment from a brief stint on YouTube will cover the history of the Indian National Congress, starting with an important section concerning the events and the imperative political shifts that took place in the 19th century that led up to the creation of the INC. Followed by its inception, we'd be concerning ourselves with its early politics and framework that the Congress would later govern itself by, with the added bonus of mentioning some substantial changes that it has made in the upper middle class society of the British Raj at the time. We'll be covering each section of this vast and nuanced history through different parts of my upcoming series pertaining to the discussion of INC history. So look ahead because we'll be having much more than this in the future. With all of that being said, let's get started. Before we can gather wind of the changing tides that took place during the 19th century British Raj, we need to get over some definitions and parameters, like what is a political party? Well, a political party can be broadly defined as a group of individuals with a shared common ideology and agenda that aims towards attaining power through the means of elections or through some other less favorable ways in order to run affairs in a country. Political organizations, or at the very least associations that served a common cause, have existed decades before the foundation of the INC. A perfect example of this could be the Young Bengal movement, founded by a group of young recalcitrant Bengal college students swayed by the teachings and preachings of the college teacher Henry Vivian de Rosio. The then young de Rosio managed to win the hearts of a great many of his students who, in loyalty to him, called themselves de Rosians. Having conducted multiple debates where students could freely challenge the then sacredly held beliefs, De Rosia managed to garner a notable number of students from the Hindu college to his side in the crusade for reform and change of the then repressive norms of the time. Albeit the form of this movement could be considered as largely an attempt to change and reform the status quo by blatant disregard and violation of normative traditions, the trend we slowly see here in India, and specifically Bengal, since it was the center for administration and development at the time, was a one of gradual and slow transformation of certain segments of society towards liberality. We observe movements such as Brahmo Samaj and the Young Bengal movement take shape over time, while several reformers like Chandra Sen, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, and Gokhale helped push forward agendas and pressing issues into the wider public eye. This shift towards liberal and social reform can be attributed to a variety of different sources. Educational reforms made during the 1830s, the establishment of universities and centers of learning, the proliferation of Enlightenment philosophy and Western thought through circles of newly emerging educated middle class Indians, and many more that I've excluded. Although the general view of this transformative period during colonial history is one where the British are mostly credited for bringing in these reforms, the fact can be said that most, if not all, these reformation movements that have transpired in the decades since company subjugation of the subcontinent were spearheaded by Indians who have taken a mere inspiration from them. The socio-cultural regeneration of India in the 19th century was occasioned by the colonial presence, not created by it. It can be further said that even with these movements, the societal shifts taking place, where there did indeed exist changes and shifts in political spectrum as well. The British Raj would later yield and manage to liberalize the system enough to add Indians into the administration as well. This can be seen in the Councils Act of 1861 and the Indian Civil Service ICS, where Indians were starting to get admitted into higher posts of administration and rule. Reforms instituted made a sweeping process for Indianization through the addition of entrance exams on a variety of different subjects such as Sanskrit or Arabic. The Act of 1861 was in fact a part of Argyll's later policy in an attempt to promote civil service positions amongst Indians. Indianization of the administration, large widely Popular movements led by Indians with the rise of a middle class in India gave way to a certain strata of fine, well educated individuals that wanted and sought for more than just what the current situation had given them. The main trade hubs and centers where an aspect of what I just described could be found in popular metropolitans like Mumbai, Calcutta, and Madras. Of course, popular newspapers and articles further accentuated this cause. The Hindu and Kesari are just few that fit the description. With all the changes that had been happening in the subcontinent throughout the 1850s, 1860s, and the 1890s, a period that would later be described as a period of socio-cultural reforms, it became clear at that point that an association, a group of like-minded, generally well-off individuals, were to make a political party at some point. Proposals for the creation of something vaguely similar to the soon to be formed INC did exist, as we could see the formation of several Indian political associations take form throughout the 1870s and 1880s. The Indian Association, for example, organized a national conference to be held from December 28th to December 30th, 1883, exactly 2 years before the first INC conference would be held. The intentions and the ulterior motives behind the men presiding over this conference were uncannily similar to the INC, with men occasioning from multiple corners of the subcontinent discussing questions of national importance. In 1878, a similar gathering did take place in Calcutta at the initiative of the Pune Sarvajanik Sabha. This gathering, perfunctory in nature, did not ruffle any major feathers in the political sphere. Not a lot of members, even from Calcutta, took part in the event as well, and the Elbert Bill controversy was still at its prime at the time. A small counter view here, however, you might be thinking that the political developments made in the favor of the Indian Association would naturally lead up to the creation of the Indian National Congress, but that argument is simply false, as the events leading up to the first INC conference were separate and built entirely out of different developments led by prominent individuals. Whilst the INC was holding the first conference, the Indian Association was holding their second conference, having even telegrammed them greeting them. We trace back the need for a political association all the way to the 1870s. By Shitol Chandra Mukherjee, in his writings to the Allahabad Indian Tribune, spoke of a need to create a national association where individuals from throughout the Raj would gather up and discuss on a yearly basis. But it could simply be put that the prominent issues and the rapid rise in development at the time led to a point where finding a common ground for discussions was seen as imperative. Many of the political establishments at the time faced deep scrutiny from the public. The British Indian Association of Bengal, for example, had been widely viewed as a body that favored zamindars or the landowning class at the time, whilst the Bombay and Madras associations were close to its moribund. The Indian Association, for example, was first formed in 1876 under the aegis of Surendranath Banerjee, a prominent Bengal moderate at the time during the Bengal Renaissance, and Anand Mohan Bose. It should also be noted that at this pressing time period, many such associations and political groups formed. For example, the Madras Mahajan Sabha, whilst the Pune Sarvajanik Sabha still had a huge swath of nationalist intellectuals at the time. All of that, which I have just described, explains the situation both politically and socially that India was in at the time. A common unified secular cause for both creating a medium as well as forming a base for the national movement had to be created somehow, and that dream was indeed manifested to reality not by an Indian, rather a British civil servant of Scottish descent, Alan Octavian Hume. All the movements and the reforms that were pressed onto the officials were done so mostly by Indians, who have, for the most part, taken inspiration from many teachings at the time. The INC, however, was manifested into reality through the much guided effort of a particular retired civil servant, Alan Octavian Hume. Now, who exactly is Alan Octavian Hume, and what did he have to do at all in the making of a political body that later would cavalcade into something far bigger? Well, in order to get to the question, we need to first cover some of his early histories that would certainly explain most of our inquiries about his decisions. A.O. Hume was a prominent civil servant, ornithologist, horticulturist, and theosophist, born in 1829 to a prominent radical politician, Joseph Hume, who was regarded as the leader of the Radical Party in the House of Commons. Hume would later pursue his education at the University College London and the now famous East Indian Company's Hailbury College, made specially for the training of British bureaucrats for India. Having completed his civil service exams, he would later join the Bengal Civil Service in the year 1849 under the then Governor General Lord Dalhousie. As a civil servant, he would later be administered to the region of Etawah, Northwest Province. It was here that A.O. Hume would receive widespread recognition for his actions during the 1857 Sepoy Mutiny. While the mutiny ravaged parts of northern India, A.O. Hume managed to mobilize an irregular army of 650 people in the Etawah region of Uttar Pradesh, managing to thwart away the rebellious forces. The 1857 revolt, in all its relevancy in the years to follow, had a significantly profound effect on the British servant. So much so that in his later writings, he would speak in devout sympathy towards the Indian masses. Having in already prior actions spread education and build schools in an attempt to make education more easily accessible to the Indian people. A really famous quotation from him would go as follows: "God help the poor cowed villagers. I can't, and nobody else seems inclined to do so," said A.O. Hume after the mutiny. A.O. Hume would later go on to be the founder of a newspaper known as the People's Friend, in English, Hindi, and Urdu. Hume was strongly under the view that his duty was more than just a tax collector, but rather an individual who would execute his moral duties. Clearly, what could be gathered from that is that Hume had massive support in some way or the other towards the Indians. This could be gathered from documents and his own writing stating the same case. His sympathy and his attitude towards the Indians did raise some eyebrows in the echelons of the bureaucracy at the time. The controversy surrounding it clearly created some strife between A.O. Hume and the civil service he was serving at the time. After the collectorship of Etawah, Hume was appointed Commissioner of Customs, which was a post he held from 1867 to 1869. In 1870, after 3 years as Provincial Commissioner of Customs, Hume became Secretary to the Government of India in the new Department of Revenue, Commerce and Agriculture. His huge regard for Indians as well as for their betterment in their overall development saw Hume get demoted in 1879 due to the sheer controversy that surrounded it. This was mainly done by the big bureaucracy at the time, which only viewed his moral duties as suspicious and at worst seditious. Hume would later go on to retire in the year 1882 after his demotion, which had a significant toll on the civil servant. It was during this time he would go on to invest a large portion of his time in organizing and laying the bedrock for the soon-to-be Indian National Congress. The events leading up to the foundation of the Indian National Congress were discussed earlier. The growing mobilization of young Indians and intellectuals at the time to create a common ground, an all-Indian federation where delegates could gather and discuss topics of national interest, was deemed as top priority by many of the well-known and prominent Indians at the time. A.O. Hume happened to be one of them. But he was an Indian, obviously. Albeit, Hume was nowhere to be the first person to propose an all-Indian conference. The organizational skills as well as the associations that A.O. Hume utilized couldn't have been done by the sole actions of an Indian, as Gokhale would later comment on the foundation of the INC in 1912. No Indian could have started the Indian National Congress, apart from the fact that anyone putting his hand out to such a gigantic task had need to have Mr. Hume's commanding and magnetic personality. Even if an Indian had possessed such a personality and had come forward to start such a movement embracing all India, The officials in India would not have allowed the movement to come into existence if the founder of the Congress had not been an Englishman and, and a distinguished ex official. Such was the official distrust of political agitation in those days that the authorities would have at once found some way or the other to suppress the movement. Clearly, what could be discerned is that there had to be someone from within the system uh, that had to create this political movement, such as the Indian National Congress. And this was finally done so with the help of A.O. Hume. The motives behind Hume have always been a subject of controversy. The fact that he could have attempted to create some form of political agitation through the creation of the INC after his untimely demotion and later retirement cannot be ruled out. But what can be ascertained is Hume's sympathetic interest towards India and her people, in addition to his desire for self government and radicalism, which have in many ways predated his disgraceful demotion. During the years before the first conference was to be held, A.O. Hume had shared a large interest in theosophy, although his interest would wane in the years since the formation of the INC. Prior to that, he would participate and gain a large interest in theosophy through the then Theosophical Society, one led by a particular Madame Blavatsky. The safety valve theory is a prominent theory that sprouted in the decades after the formation of the INC as a movement and a political body. A potent, long lasting, and certainly a really influential one at that. Researching the melange of different documents and secondary sources discussing the safety valve theory just shows how controversial and conflicting the theory actually is in reality. As most of you may already know, the INC wasn't created on short notice, nor was it an impromptu setup orchestrated by A.O. Hume. Planning as well as creating the environment for such an organization and congregation of delegates from throughout the subcontinent can be traced back as far as 1883 to 1884. By around 1884, A.O. Hume would garner a strong friendship with the then Viceroy of the British Raj, Lord Ripon. Now, what should be noted is the transformative period as well as influence Lord Ripon had, both as a viceroy and towards the wider masses. Lord Ripon was widely regarded as an individual who shared a heightened sense of sympathy towards the Indian populace. Unlike his previous counterparts, having bolstered multiple reforms like the Government Resolution on Local Self-Government 1882 and the Hunter Commission on Education 1882. Now, it would be noted that during this time period, being the final months of Ripon's term in office, A.O. Hume managed to arrive at Bombay in 1884 and garner a somewhat commendable following amongst the intellectual class in Bombay. He visited almost every province, and wherever he went, he discussed with his friends and contacts the following subjects: the holding of an annual conference of representative men from all parts of India. Following this, A.O. Hume would return back to Simla, except this time to acquaint himself with the new Viceroy of the British Raj, Lord Dufferin, and it is here that the controversy behind the safety valve theory begins. Lord Dufferin was one of the first persons to have consulted regarding the inception of the Indian National Congress. Evidence regarding the intentions as well as the conversations both A.O. Hume and Lord Dufferin shared have forever been marred with inconsistency and errors that have been persistent throughout the sources in the following decades. During the period of consultation, however, as the safety valve theory proposes, A.O. Hume, under the official direction of the Lord Dufferin, decided it would be best to establish a constitutional outlet, otherwise a safety valve, in order to alleviate the furor of unrest and instability caused by resistance by the natives, which could have led to a rebellion taking place. This idea of the safety valve was published in articles like Young India in 1960 by nationalists like Lala Rajpat Rai, and will later be used by RSS chief leader M.S. Golwalkar in order to attack the Congress and its secular roots in order to bolster their own communal and religious agendas. But how credible is the theory in the first place? Well, from the evidence we do share and are aware of, it clearly wasn't credible. Historical evidence of the safety valve theory includes that at some point A.O. Hume received 7 volumes of documents and secret reports that convinced him enough to believe that there existed a major discontent among the lower and middle classes of India at the time. The main instigator for this theory is V.C. Bipan in his biography of A.O. Hume in 1913. As it turns out, these reports included immense data favoring the case as they were received from the CID. But despite this, historians in the 1950s failed to discover or even find out where exactly A.O. Hume found those documents, as none could be found in the National Archives. There also remains the theory that A.O. Hume had received these secret reports through numerous chelas, religious folks, as he was deeply interested in Eastern philosophy at the time. Furthermore, in the years prior to this, he would be specifically acquainted with with Madame Blavatsky, a theosophist who claimed to be in touch with these gurus and would describe as Mahatmas. Furthermore, his contact with the occult and initiates saw him make statements that included how he received the majority of his information from, well, initiates. Despite all of these accusations, the facts remain scanty and up for debate. V.C. Bonerjee's works really remain of the origination of this theory and its later proliferation. And this also leads me to the other accusation that Lord Dufferin especially advised the Congress founder member to not discuss matters of social concern, quotation marks, which is yet another false fact that happened to pass over for generations. All of these theories and ideas of how exactly the INC formed will later coalesce into, well, creating a sort of rough terrain for any person who's trying to study and understand the INC history. And because of this, our information on the founding of the INC as well as its originations, starting from A.O. Hume, remain to be quite scanty. Now, I would like to end this video now, and from in later future videos, I would discuss how the INC conference and the first conference held between the dates of December 28th to December 31st in the year 1885 in Gokuldas Tejpal Sanskrit, the Gokuldas Tejpal University. So obviously I would like to end the video here, as I have extended it to a far more protracted period of time, and because of that I will like to say that in the videos following this we will be discussing in a far more nuanced level of INC as well as the events that transpired following the first conference and the effects it had on the many delegates that attended it. So thank you for watching this video. If you happen to endure my long rant on INC history, I thank you, because this video was surprisingly took me a way longer period of time, even though I could have just completed it in less than a week. So yeah, that's it, and thank you for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.